welcome all our guests and attendees, and hope there are only 19 people I can see have joined. Possibly, yeah, people are still joining. So today, as we decided last week, that we will take up few questions from you, whatever if you have noted down. And first, I'll clarify your doubts in the last two sessions what we have discussed, and after that, probably we will start off. You can actually upload my presentation. Meanwhile, they can post their queries in the chat box. Let us see that if there is any question. So in the last two sessions, mostly we have discussed about bradycardia ECGs and AV blocks. Then we have discussed about some of the few of the tachycardia ECGs, predominantly narrow QRS tachycardia. So today my target will be complete our issues about tachycardia, and we'll be probably revising few of them. Uh, so I do not find any questions in the chat box yet, because Dr. Paja said that we will be starting with clarifying your doubts. So let us hope that we will start our presentation without wasting our time. And meanwhile, if you have any question, okay, Amritendu has put up a question that we shall discuss about junctional rhythm. So in one sense, it is a very pertinent question. So why it is important? Because first of all, you need to recognize it, and if you recognize, then you can think about the treatment. If I take the whiteboard, so let's say, where is our junction? This is our sinus node, this is AV node, and then there is a right and left bundle. So if any arrhythmia arises from this junction, we will call it a junctional rhythm. Generally, there is a hierarchy. From sinus node is the most superior structure, and that has the maximum firing rate, let's say 60 to 100. Whereas if you go down in the hierarchy, the junction has a automaticity which is somewhere around 40, 45. If by any chance your sinus node is affected with a significant sinus node dysfunction or sick sinus syndrome, then as part of a hierarchy, the junction will take over to prevent significant bradycardia. If by any chance your junction or the His bundle is also affected, then what comes is the His-Purkinje system, and the escape rhythm starts from the His-Purkinje system. The rate is somewhere around 30 to 35 or maybe up to 40. If by any chance both of your fascicles are significantly diseased, then the escape rhythm can come from the myocardium. Then we can call it a myocardial rhythm or a wide QRS escape. That has a very unstable kind of escape rhythm, and the rate is variable from 10 to 30. So this is what we are talking about, a junctional rhythm when we have a bradycardia. There can be a tachycardia also. Let's say our sinus rate is around 60 beats per minute, but the patient have automaticity of the junctional area, and that gives rise to a something like a narrow QRS slow ventricular tachycardia. The rate is sometime around it can vary from even 60 to 90 to 100, even 110, 120. Sometimes this is frequently encountered in patients who have a reperfusion of an acute coronary syndrome. So last Friday, Dr. Ayon Kaur has discussed about acute coronary syndrome. So what you see there, if you revascularize an area, let's say the RCA was blocked, you have opened the vessel. So in that case, the myocardium and sometimes the junctional area, the blood supply is restored, and that gives rise to automaticity in the junctional area, and it can give rise to a rhythm where you do not see any P waves. So you will find like a VT, a slow VT, only QRS complex. So there is no P waves. Then the differential diagnosis comes either a junctional rhythm or atrial fibrillation. These two are the predominant differential diagnoses of a ECG, where you find a reasonably narrow QRS ventricular tachycardia kind of morphology, but there is no P wave. So either it is a atrial fibrillation or it is a junctional rhythm if the rate is something around 70, 80, 90. So how to differentiate? Generally they are very narrow and they have such kind of setting, as I said, post MI setting. So that is prone for a AIVR, accelerated idioventricular rhythm, that is a little faster junctional rhythm. If we get time, we can share some ECG of junctional rhythm, although it is not in my present slide, but we can discuss about it. So there are two presentations of junctional rhythm. One could be because of bradycardia. In those cases, the junctional rhythm comes. There is a no P wave because there is sinus node is diseased. So the escape rhythm comes from junction or AV node. In other words, the reverse is tachycardia. There can be automaticity of the junction, which is predominantly seen after revascularization of a ischemic territory. And that time the junctional rate will be something around 90, 100 like this. The second question is from Shreya. She wants to know about atrial flutter with 1:1 conduction versus AV-NRT. So this is again a very pertinent question, very important question. But unfortunately, at the stage where you are now, it will be little difficult for you to differentiate. Sometimes we take up patients in the lab for AV-NRT, but they turn out to be atrial flutter. What I can tell you about gross differentiation is in atrial flutter, we are talking about typical atrial flutter. The P wave rate is something, if these are P waves, sorry for my bad drawing. So if these are the P waves, the P wave rate will be at the rate of 250 to 350 beats per minute. So this is 250 to 350 beats per minute P waves. Whereas in AV-NRT, the general rate is 160 to 180. It can be faster, but generally rate is below 200. So if you find a ECG which is very fast with a rate of 250 to 350, you can consider it, and a narrow QRS tachycardia obviously, you can consider it as a atrial flutter with 1:1 conduction. Having said that, I must mention that atrial flutter with 1:1 conduction is a very rare entity. The reason is physiologically AV node is not capable enough to transmit 250 to 350 numbers of P waves. Hope I am audible. So, and hope what I said you could understand something out of it. So what I meant to say, generally if we take a mean of the 250 and 350, let's say the rate is around 300, what you generally tend to find is a 2:1 conduction of atrial flutter, which can actually mimic 150 rate of a AV-NRT. So rarely you will find AV-NRT which finally turned out to be a atrial flutter. Generally seen in patients where you think it is a AV-NRT, you want to give a adenosine. Once you give adenosine, you find this P, then a QRS, again 3,4P and a QRS. So adenosine unmasks or exposes the atrial flutter which was there as an underlying rhythm. So these two are very pertinent question, but the second one is a little difficult one at your stage to differentiate. I will ask you not to bother much about that. Our target of this presentation is to discuss some of the practically what you face in day-to-day clinical practice and what you should not miss or what you must not miss as a physician. So we are expecting, or I am welcoming many questions. If anyone have any question, you can put it in the chat box. Meanwhile, we are starting our today's presentation and we'll come back to the questions if any. So today we will mostly show some of the ECGs, but there will be couple of non-ECG question. So let us start with one of the non-ECG question. Now, some of you might think that this is irrelevant to you. I will tell you why this is not irrelevant. So my question is, who is this gentleman and why did he get a Nobel Prize? I am looking at the chat box. You can start your answers now. You can have your blind guess. Keep your eyes and ears open. Look at the figure properly and tell me who is this person. Amridendu, I'm hoping that you will be answering this one. So, at first glance, you might think this is unrelated to medicine, but I will tell you in the next slide why it is related to medicine or possibly any field of medicine. So, I'm not yet got any response from anyone. So, let me show you there is something in the background. If you look in the background, you might some petri dishes here. So, can you try something now? Who is this gentleman? Right, correct. So Archit has correctly answered. That's why I said that you need to look in the diagram carefully, like you do difference between pictures in the newspaper, like that. So this gentleman is Alexander Fleming, who invented the first antibiotic of the world, which is possibly the best antibiotic till date. Now, why this is important, and I am teaching this to you. The important thing is he invented this serendipitously. This was an accidental invention by him or an accidental discovery by him. So in 1928, he opened he accidentally kept some petri dishes open, and when he came back on the next day, he found that there is a small area in the petri dishes which have not got any growth of the bacteria, and then he found that those are the fungi from the streptococcus, which has possibly from there he actually went up to invent the penicillin. Now he not only saw, although this was an accidental invention, he published this in 1929, and finally in 1945 he got a Nobel Prize. So you can see almost 16 years after his first invention he got Nobel Prize. So the motto of this slide is, whenever you find anything, you will find many things in your life, especially in the wards, giving rounds, in the file, blood reports, ECGs, echo report, which are very interesting. You must keep a copy of them or document them, and later on, if you get time, try to publish them. Sometimes your results will lead you for prizes, sometimes may not, but that is irrelevant. So most importantly, document them properly and keep or archive them. They will be definitely in use for a future prizes, which is probably possibly irrelevant, but if you get a prize, that's well and good. So Vikas has asked a question here. Inappropriate or post anesthesia recovery unit atrial fibrillation develops in a patient without any previous history of cardiac. How to manage? So let me answer this before we go to the next slide. So this is again a very common scenario. So because must be working in anesthesia or maybe a post CTVS unit. That's why he has encountered this very commonly. What we encounter, a patient who never had atrial fibrillation now suddenly gets atrial fibrillation. Why this happens? Because post surgery there are multiple things, and most importantly you have lines in C2, you have sympathetic overdrive, the patient is in pain, already you have gone and done some surgeries in the heart, sometimes you have touched the atrium. So there are at least 10 things which will try to stimulate the sympathetic drive, and that is the most common factor for triggering atrial fibrillation. Generally, this atrial fibrillation settle down within next 3 to 4 days. During those 3 to 4 days, it is up to you whether you try to control the rate or you are very aggressive to control the rhythm. If you try to control the rates, possibly to me as a personal opinion, it is better to just try to control the rate. Generally, because once you give a beta blocker, the patient's pain subsides, the atrial fibrillation terminates within next 72 hours. So I would say the drug of choice would be beta blockers. If there is no contraindication, you can give, if there is LV dysfunction, you can give Lanoxin. If you want to be little more robust, you can give amiodarone also, provided the liver function test is good. If it doesn't terminate within 72 hours, possibly you can try one cardioversion with a medical cardioversion. The drug of choice will be ibutylide, which is a IV drug. It has a short half-life and its effect is over within say 8 to 12 hours. And why ibutylide is preferable than amiodarone is because ibutylide has a higher success rate for cardioversion. So, in nutshell, post-operative AF is very common. Try to control the rates. Try to cut down the sympathetic drive by beta blocker. If it doesn't terminate within 72 hours, you can try a cardioversion. Generally, it works. Let us move to our next ECG. This is something which you need to register in your mind. This ECG you need to register in your mind. This is a lady, 25-year-old lady with dizziness and pre-syncope. And what is the possible diagnosis? Your options are below, and I am opening the poll now. Patient is a 25-year-old lady. She has episodes of dizziness. I don't know how many of you have voted, but almost all have voted correctly. So, oh, that's great. So I wanted both answers and possibly few more. Normal variant, okay. Okay. So let me go by one. The first option is right bundle branch block. In fact, few patients with right bundle branch block will have a ECG what is being shown in V1. But what is unusual for a right bundle branch block is this pattern. Generally, right bundle branch block do not have such elevation of ST in lead V2. And that tells us there is something more than right bundle branch block. If we look at the ECG and try to summarize it, we can call it there is some problem in V1 and V2. And what is the problem? There is J point elevation and there is a little ST elevation. So there is a very nice paper. I tend to forget the name of the author. What they said that generally if you look at V1, you will find RS pattern like this. But the descent of this is very sharp. Whereas in Brugada, you will find RSR dash, but this will be like this. So this angle or the slope is very slow. What you see in V2 or even V1. And this is very characteristic of Brugada syndrome. This ECG will be Brugada syndrome unless proven otherwise. There can be Brugada pattern in patients who do not have any symptom and generally they do not require any treatment unless they have a strong family history of Brugada syndrome or they have a pre-syncope or syncope. Having said that, although this ECG is classical for Brugada syndrome, we also must consider few of the RV cardiomyopathy. And among them, the most important one is ARVC, arrhythmogenic right ventricular dysplasia. We have seen ECGs where they look like Brugada syndrome, but they have a monomorphic VT documented and they turn out to be a ARVC. How do we make the diagnosis and differentiation? In ARVC, your echo will be abnormal in most of the patients. Your echocardiography will show the right atrium and right ventricle will be dilated and right ventricle outflow tract is most of the time dilated even if you don't have a prominent right ventricle dilatation. The outflow tract is generally dilated. Whereas in Brugada, it will be completely normal. Sometimes around 10 to 15% of ARVC, they do not have any echocardiographic abnormality. And if you think the patient has developed a monomorphic VT but echo is normal and you have such ECG, you also should undertake a cardiac MRI which 100% picks up. It has a very high specificity and sensitivity for ARVC, and it tells you the ECG finding which you found is not Brugada, it is arrhythmogenic right ventricular dysplasia. The important finding, which I also mentioned, that ARVC generally developed a monomorphic scar VT, whereas in Brugada they develop VF. Either you have documents of VF or Torsades kind of ECG feature, which we will be discussing next, or you do not have any ECG, just a history of syncope. But if you have monomorphic VT, you can be rest assured that it is not Brugada. Monomorphic VT is hardly ever seen in Brugada syndrome. So this ECG is sine qua non for Brugada, but always have a look on the echocardiography, rule out structural heart disease like RV cardiomyopathy. I will go to the next one. So these are the types of Brugada syndrome. The classical one is type 1, where you find a coved upwards ST elevation in V1, V2. The type 2 and type 3 are little difficult to differentiate. And if this kind of ECG features type 2 and 3 you find, and the patient has a history of syncope, you can do provocation challenge test with flecainide or IV procainamide, although not available in India, to produce V1 or type 1 ECG, which is classical of Brugada, diagnostic of Brugada syndrome. We are going for our next ECG. Let us have a voting for this. What is the diagnosis on this ECG and how to manage? Is it a torsade de pointes? Is it a polymorphic VT? Is it a scar VT? Or is it a SVT with aberrancy? Okay. I could find some responses. I'm expecting more. So, let us start the discussion before I publish the voting. We have 4 options here. I'll start with the last one. So, first of all, whoever has answered it SVT with aberrancy, it is very, very unusual to have a SVT with aberrancy so fast and so wide. So SVT aberrancy is ruled out from the look of the ECG itself. You do not need any algorithm. It straight away rules out SVT with aberrancy. The second one is scar VT. 9% of you have answered it as scar VT, but scar VT is monomorphic VT. Monomorphic, same looking morphology in the lead where you are looking at. Here, if you look at the rhythm strip, you see the QRS is changing a little beat to beat. So it is not a monomorphic VT. Now coming to the other two, I would say around 80% who has answered torsades or who have answered a polymorphic VT, both of you are correct. There is a subtle difference between the two. I will try to discuss that. So what is torsades or polymorphic VT? In polymorphic VT, you have bit to bit variation between the QRS complexes, what you find in the rhythm strip. Some say it is swinging around a baseline or a strip, which looks like as you see in even lead AVL and V2. Now, when you have we call it as a polymorphic VT. Now, when you have a polymorphic VT in presence of a long QT, we call it a torsades. When you have a polymorphic VT in absence of long QT, then we call it a simple polymorphic VT. The treatment is generally same, but you need to give a definite answer. In that case, you need to look at the QT interval. In this patient, at least whatever leads we have, if we look here, you look it carefully here. So the T is almost near the P wave. T is ending here. So if you drop a line between two RR, the T wave is exceeding half of RR. So I will call it a long QT, and in presence of long QT, there is a R on T phenomena. So this beat is a R on T, R wave on T wave. That produces this kind of polymorphic VT. Because it is in presence of long QT, I will call it a torsades. But even if you don't call it torsades and you call it polymorphic VT is all right. What is important is how to manage these patients, because most of the time we see patients with this kind of rhythm receiving amiodarone even by prescribed by cardiologist, renowned cardiologist, knowledgeable cardiologist. This is one rhythm where 100% amiodarone will not work. If it does anything to this rhythm, it will worsen and it can make it refractory and recurrent, because amiodarone itself can produce a longer QT and it can actually predispose this patient's VT more and more and more. So, what is the treatment of choice? Generally, this long QT is because of some reason. Long QT cannot be because of unknown reason. Either the patient had an underlying long QT from birth, which has been exposed now, or her QT was normal because of some drugs or electrolyte abnormality. He has developed a long QT which has produced that this kind of torsade. Yesterday only I saw a patient in CCU. She was otherwise all right. Just in front of us, she threw such kind of polymorphic VT which can be life threatening. It can induce a VF if not promptly treated. The reason was a hypokalemia. She had a potassium of 2.5. What we did not have any potassium value. So we treated with calcium, we treated with magnesium, and we immediately sent a ABG or a VBG to get a potassium report. We quickly got the report around 2 and the lab value was 2.5. As soon as we got the ABG and the value was around 2.0, we replaced with potassium, and around 4 episodes of such thing happened which settled down after potassium and calcium magnesium infusion. So empirically you can give calcium and magnesium. Potassium you cannot give empirically. You have to have at least some rough idea about what is the potassium level. In patients who are having recurrent VT like this, despite calcium and magnesium, you can use Xylocat or phenytoin, even is class 1B drug. You can use them to control or tide over the rhythm. Now, going for the next ECG, look, this is a tricky one. Please look it carefully before you answer. And I am opening the voting now. Let me give you a background of this patient. You are a grown-up gentleman. Sorry for the quality of the ECG, but this is what we had. So a grown-up gentleman of around 25 years old, and he has a diagnosis of a cyanotic heart disease. In fact, I'll give you a more clue. So he had Epstein's anomaly. What is the possible diagnosis? So better to rule out one by one. Do you think it is a monomorphic VT? Do you think a SVT with aberrancy? Do you think it is AF? Do you think it is VF? Exclude one by one, then whatever is left, you vote in between them. So, meanwhile, I am getting some votes, but let us discuss before we complete the voting. First of all, again, I said, this rhythm, you register or you take a screenshot. It is called wide, rapid, and irregular, or you can call it a bizarre rhythm. Wide and rapid. What does it mean by wide and rapid? Wide means most likely VT. SVT aberrance is ruled out there itself. Very wide. So very wide, very rapid. But most important clue is irregular. If you look at the rhythm strip, I can show you the irregularity here. You can show this RR interval, they are different. So this patient has a very wide, very rapid and irregular rhythm. So VT is ruled out, SVT with aberrancy is ruled out. What is left is atrial fibrillation and ventricular fibrillation. Now, why someone can call it almost like a ventricular fibrillation? I will not mind, because the treatment will be as like ventricular fibrillation. You have to immediately cardiovert the patient, because these patients will be 100% hemodynamically unstable. But the actual answer will be atrial fibrillation. I have given you the background. This patient has a Epstein's anomaly. If a patient of a Epstein's anomaly, they commonly have accessory pathway conduction, and once they have accessory pathway conduction and they develop atrial fibrillation, they have a very rapid conduction through the accessory pathway, which gives rise to a wide irregular rhythm. Wide regular rhythm we know, but wide irregular rhythm, you can see the irregularity very prominently here. Generally, if a tachycardia is very fast, you cannot make out even if it is irregular. If you are making out that it is irregular, that means you have very likely possibility of atrial fibrillation in background. So this patient had a atrial fibrillation plus WPW. You are fooled because I haven't given the full option here. So AF with WPW is the correct answer. Before we jump on to the next one, I'll just ask if anyone has any question. So I'm not getting any chat box question here. So let me proceed here to the next one. Again, a non-ECG tracing. I want all of you to be correct on this. And let me open up the voting for you. This is again important. This is very important. You need to know from whom you are learning. If you don't know from whom you are learning, so that's why you need a little about history. I am 100% sure that all of you have sometimes seen his photograph. So I'm not getting much of votes. Okay, someone has answered none of the above. If someone has answered none of the above, I want the answer in that case. There is a question in the chat box. I will certainly explain this. Why not SVT with aberrancy? There are a few ECGs I will explain before I finish today. Why? How to differentiate between SVT with aberrancy and a VT. I will come back to that. So someone has said Braunwald, someone has said Wenckebach, someone has said Einthoven, who invented ECG machine. Someone has said Alfred Blalock also, who actually was a inventor or the creator of Blalock-Taussig shunt. But the question or the answer is none of the above. And let me see, anyone has said, yeah, correct. So Rajat has correctly said he is Tinsley or Harrison. There is no doubt about it. And I urge all of you to read Harrison. Okay, for whatever time you get, there is no replacement for one book, and that is Harrison. In cardiology, there are 10 replacements for Braunwald, but in medicine, there is no replacement for Harrison. So you certainly need to know him. And even when I was doing cardiology, I used to read Harrison's part of cardiology, the part of written in Harrison. So it is such an important book. So let us continue. So this is the ECG of the previous patient who had a bizarre rhythm, this one. So once you have cardioverted the patient, you will find this ECG. And what is there in the ECG? Anyone in the chat box, please? What is there on this ECG? What is the abnormality of the patient on this ECG? Once you have cardioverted the patient who had a possible atrial fibrillation, what is there now on the ECG? So this is called pre-excitation. We have discussed this earlier, that the PR interval is short and there is a slurring. Almost all of the leads have a slurring here. So this is called delta waves and the PR interval is very short. Yes. So someone has said, Shantana has said it's WPW. It's correct. Perfect. So this is 100% WPW syndrome who had atrial fibrillation. And yes, all of you are correct. We have answered almost 4 or 5 answers I have got. So now this is a 63-year-old gentleman who have come with a pre-syncope. And the question is, someone has suggested to go for all these investigations. So which one you think is the most apt investigation? I'm not finding any vote. So what is there on the ECG that you might do angiogram? Why you think about angiogram? Or loop recorder or pacemaker or MRI brain or Holter? He had underwent a syncope. I'm not finding any answers. So let me proceed. So I got few answers. Okay, okay. Now I am getting boards. Yeah. Okay. So around 75% of you said, 80% of you have said we have to do a Holter. But let us see what is there on the ECG. What is the diagnosis on the ECG? So Ashwin has written CHB. Possibly you are correct, but even if someone says 2 is to an AV block, I won't mind. But what Ashwin has said, let us see what he has tried to point out, and he is actually spot on. So if you look at the ECG, you might find that I am just marking the P waves here. So you see there is almost like a 2 is to an AV block. Even if he had a 2 is to 1, in presence of a right bundle branch block, this patient has an infrahesian disease. So Shantana said 2 is to an AV block, but 2 is to an AV block can be wanky back. 2 is to an AV block can also be seen physiologically sometimes, especially during sleep. But why this patient doesn't need any investigation? He straight away needs a pacemaker, provided your potassium, creatinine are all right. Is he also has, in addition to 2 is to 1, he has a evidence of infra his disease. Now let us come back to Ashwin's comment. He said that there is a complete heart block. Why he said this? And he is correct. Sayantan or me is not correct. Who thought it is 2 is to 1? If you look the PR interval here, PR interval here, PR interval here, PR interval here, they are varying. That means the P are not associated with the QRS. What at the first glance appeared it is a 2 is to 1, actually they are not. It appeared 2 is to 1 because the P wave rate was around 100 and the QRS rate was around 50. So they coincidentally looked like 2 is to 1. He has a complete heart block on your ECG. Then what else you want before you want to put a pacemaker who already had a pre-syncope? So this is degenerative complete heart block. In addition to infrahesian disease, he straight away goes for a pacemaker. MRI brain is useless in this scenario. Angiogram is not needed because you do not, sometimes you need angiogram because 2 is to an AV block or complete heart block can be seen in acute inferior wall MI. But here in lead 2-3 AVF, you do not find any ST elevation. So if you are not thinking of acute STEMI, we are not talking about old STEMI. Old STEMI, you forget about it. If it is not acute STEMI and STEMI, then there is no point of doing an angiogram. Loop recorder is not there. What you can see in the ECG, what you are looking for in loop recorder. Holter again the same. You straight away goes for a pacemaker. So someone, Sayantan has commented about ventriculophasic arrhythmia, but this is not relevant to here. So we will discuss ventriculophasic arrhythmia, but I think let us discuss simple things here. Complicated things we can read out from the internet, which is relevant and important for us. Let us focus on that. If there is time permits, we will discuss ventriculophasic arrhythmia as well. So now let's go to the next ECG. 55-year-old lady, and this is the ECG. He has come during COVID times, and as usual, she doesn't want admission. So what can we do? And let me open the poll. So I'm opening the poll. So a recent OPD visit of a patient, 55-year-old lady, not willing for angiogram. Would you still suggest an angiogram, or you can get away with a TMT or medical management or thallium test? So I have got around 20% of students who are opting for TMT or medical management, around 30% rather. It's great because we can avoid admission in during the COVID time. She's already an aged lady. Now, this patient goes to TMT room, does a TMT, and throws a VF and dies there itself in TMT room. And we are responsible for the thing. The importance of this ECG is such, if you see such ECG with a T wave inversion only in V2, V3, maybe V4 and nowhere else, and the patient has a effort angina, This is called Whelan syndrome, and this patient is a candidate for a urgent revascularization. If you do not want urgent revascularization, for God's sake, do not undertake any stress test, because this patient is supposed to have a very tight left anterior descending stenosis unless proven otherwise, and they are prone for MI in next couple of days to weeks. If you provoke it with a stress test with thallium or a TMT, you are responsible for it. So this patient straight away goes for angiogram and admission. There is no way out, and especially do not do any stress test for this patient. This also says the patient's LAD territory is viable. You do not need any viability testing before revascularization. Now, from this ECG onwards, couple of ECG, we will try to differentiate between SVT aberrancy and VT. So, let us see how many of us think that this is a VT and how many of you think this is a SVT with aberrancy. Let's say we have only two options. Option 1 is VT, ventricular tachycardia. Option 2 is SVT with aberrancy. There is no option 3, 4, 5, but you can start your voting. 35-year-old male, normal echo, recurrent palpitation. Till now, whatever votes I have got, they are saying VT, ventricular tachycardia. I will not go into the detail of now I am having 50-50 voting. So 50% says SVT aberrancy, 50% says VT. So it is not important to be correct, but it is important to know how to differentiate between correct and incorrect. So let us go through one by one. I will not go into a detail of algorithm, but just to remember, you can note down couple of points which we will be discussing. Whenever you are encountering a wide QRS tachycardia, 4-5 things you remember as a rule of thumb. If some of them are there, you straight away diagnose it as VT. If not, you consider both. But in a wide QRS, you always consider VT. Even if it is all features of SVT aberrancy, still have a VT as a differential. So first of all, if you see VA dissociation, straight away it is VT. On this ECG, there are some doubts about VA dissociation in AVR, but not very clear. So forget about it. The second one is a QRS concordance in chest leads. So here in V1 to V6, you have a complete concordance. V1 to V6, all are R waves. So that is one of the evidence it says it is VT and not SVT with aberrancy. Why not? Because what are you thinking about SVT aberrancy? This morphology. So again, it is very, very important. How do you call this ECG? You call it as you see in V1. It is predominant positive, so you call it a RBBB morphology wide QRS tachycardia. This is not LBBB morphology wide QRS tachycardia. The LBBB morphology wide QRS tachycardia, the QRS will be negative. Here it is positive. So in RBBB wide QRS tachycardia, what we are trying to see that in V1 to V6 all are positive. Generally, they have some negativity in V6 or V2, V3, but there is no S wave at all. That is one of another rule of thumb that if you find concordance, it tells you it is VT. But let's say you do not have concordance. The third point comes if a QRS is very wide, more than 140 milliseconds, or you can remember as 3 small square. Here it is almost 4 or 5 small square, 4 or 5 small square. So you know that this is possibly, even if you did not have this concordance, you know that this patient has a VT because it is very wide. This number 3 or 4, whatever I have said. Coming to number 4, if you look at the initial beginning part of the QRS, if it is slurred, very slurred, there is something called intrinsic or deflection. So beginning of QRS to peak of QRS, if it is more than 60 milliseconds, that is 1.5 small square, then it is possibly VT. And look at two leads which are very, very important. If AVR is positive, generally AVR is negative in SVT. And if V6 is negative, so V6 negative, VAVR positive. This also tells you it is VT. And axis change or abnormal axis. What do you mean by abnormal axis? In a right bundle morphology, you expect if it is SVT aberrancy, you expect a normal axis or a right axis deviation. If you have a left axis deviation, it is VT. So right bundle branch morphology with a left axis deviation, it is VT. And the reverse, LBB morphology plus right axis deviation, again it is VT. So axis discordance. So let us enumerate one by one again. So if we enumerate them one by one is VA dissociation. It tells you VT. If you do not find QRS concordance, if you find, then it is also VT. If you do not have QRS concordance, look at QRS width, very wide, bizarre looking, VT. If you do not have initial slurring, the first part of QRS having slur, and 5 important two leads, V6 and AVR. So generally in sinus rhythm, AVR is negative, but if it becomes positive, then it is VT. The V6 generally is positive in sinus rhythm. If you find V6 is negative, then it is also VT. And possibly these are all what you can remember. And sixth is axis change. So first of all, if you have sinus rhythm ECG, you see the shift of the axis. If you do not have sinus rhythm ECG, just look at the axis and the bundle branch. In this ECG, you saw that he has a RBBB morphology and his axis is 1 negative, AVF positive. So right axis deviation. So RBBB plus right axis deviation. This cannot assure you about VT. It could be VT, it could be SVT aberrancy. So you have to look into other things. But had it been RBBB plus left axis deviation, then I would have certainly called from that criteria itself, that is VT. So we'll revise one by one again. There is one differential diagnosis of this ECG as VT. We have discussed it earlier, but I will again tell you that is something very difficult to differentiate, which is called antidromic tachycardia. Antidromic tachycardia still can be wide, although it is a SVT, but it is not aberrancy. It is the accessory pathway conducting from atrium to ventricle. So, whenever you cardiovert this patient, after cardioversion, look at the sinus rhythm. If you find pre-excitation on the ECG, in that case, delta wave, short PR, which is not here, in that case, you consider VT versus antidromic tachycardia. But here, if you do not find any pre-excitation, you are 100% sure this has to be VT, VT, VT. I will again revise in some of the next ECGs. If there is any doubt, I will come back again. So, if I go back to the ECG, there are 4 or 5 features which you, as a ruler, don't remember any algorithm. Forget about all algorithm. 5 or 6 features. AV dissociation, very wide QRS, slurring of the QRS, QRS concordance, AVR positivity, V6 negativity. These are all what you look for, and axis discordance. If these are there, any one of them are there, it is 100% VT. If not, then you need to think about possibly this is SVT aberrancy. What is also very, very important is you need to remember whether this RBBB looks like a typical RBBB or not. For this, you need to know how a typical RBBB looks like. Means, in other words, let's say this person looks like Dr. Shauren Paja or not. If he looks like Dr. Shauren Paja, that means he is Shauren Paja. If he doesn't look like Shauren Paja, then it is different. So you need to recognize Dr. Shauren Paja. So what I mean to say, you need to know how a typical RBBB and LBBB look like. If it deviates from the morphology, you know possibly you are dealing with VT, not SVT with aberrancy. I will show you case examples after some time. Now, Again, one thing, once you cardiovert a patient of wide QRS tachycardia, always look for pre-excitation. If you have a pre-excitation, you know you might be dealing with an antidromic tachycardia, and also it could be VT. Now let's go to the next one. Now this patient has a CABG. He is a 50-year-old gentleman and having moderate LV dysfunction. My question here is again very simple. Is it VT or SVT with aberrancy? Here, it is a question which makes a hell and heaven difference, because if it is ventricular tachycardia, he needs ICD in presence of a post-CABG moderate LV dysfunction. Whereas, if this patient is not having VT, it is SVT like atrial tachycardia or AVNRT, he doesn't require SVT. So I open up a poll here again. How many of you think it is VT? Option 1 is VT. Option 2 is SVT with aberrancy. These are the only two options. Very easy. Go for it. So now the voting says there is almost a 50-50. Yeah. Okay. So why did you tell this is VT? This we need to know again. In a patient where if you look at V1, this looks like almost like a typical RBBB morphology, but still this is VT unless proven otherwise. This is again important to know, because in a patient with given myocardial infarction or dilated cardiomyopathy or hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, you think about SVT aberrancy. You most of the time will be dealing, if you are dealing with a wide QRS tachycardia, with just the background itself, post MI background, post CABG, most of the time you will have a VT, not a SVT with aberrancy. You treat him like a VT. We gave amiodarone. You do not need to cardiovert these patients, because this patient was hemodynamically stable, and this is the ECG after you cardiovert the patient to sinus rhythm. So what you see here, again I said, this is his sinus rhythm, and here the ECG is completely different. Even if you look at V1 only, that tells you that this patient is having a VT here, which is of RBBB morphology. And what is the axis here? Can anyone tell me the axis on this ECG on the chat box, please? So you look at the 2,3 FVF. If 2,3 FVF is negative, then we know this is superior axis or left axis. In this case, lead 1 is also negative. Hence, it is northwest. Sayantan is very, very good. So Sayantan is excellent. This thing finding that we have a northwest axis. So northwest axis is something like a left axis also. So RBBB with left axis, as I said, axis discordance tells you this patient has a VT. What are the other findings? You see V6 is negative, AVR is positive. That also tells you this patient has a VT, not SVT, the aberrancy. But what I wanted to emphasize, although here the QRS looked relatively narrow, the initial slurring is very sharp, initial part of the QRS is very sharp, still you need to consider VT because of the given background of CABG. And then you compare with the sinus rhythm, what you know that this is different from the sinus rhythm. So this is what I was trying to mention you, that this patient always look at that this patient's sinus rhythm ECG and the tachycardia ECG. If they are different, then we will call it certainly it is a VT, not SVT with aberrancy. Now this is another patient. I don't remember the age or something. Let's say he's a 45-year-old gentleman with recurrent palpitation. We don't know the echocardiography. And again, we will open up the options here. Meanwhile, you can have a look at the ECG. So you can go for voting now. Is it SVT with pre-excitation, SVT with aberrancy, WPW, VF? So whenever you are in doubt, rule out couple of things which you are sure about. So first of all, in a wide or narrow QRS tachycardia, always see whether it is a regular tachycardia or an irregular tachycardia. So to me, this is a regular tachycardia. And if it is a regular tachycardia, atrial fibrillation with WPW is certainly ruled out. A VF is not there. We know this is not a ECG of a VF. Either it is a monomorphic VT or SVT with aberrancy. Again, the few things. If you look at V1, actually here, the V1 is like a typical V1 of RBBB, RSR dash. So this is like a typical RBBB. But what is against a SVT aberrancy is your AVR is completely positive, V6 is negative, 2-3 AVF is negative. That means your axis is leftward axis or superior axis. And if you look at lead 1, then you are having actually northwest axis. So all this tells you, although this ECG looks like pretty little narrow QRS, even this ECG, let's say if I only give you lead 3, some may say this is SVT. So a very narrower ECG, which is actually the differential diagnosis is fascicular VT, a very narrow QRS VT. And again, here we have an axis discordance. RBBB morphology, leftward axis. So this is again a VT, and it is a diagnosis of fascicular VT. In contrast, this is another ECG. Let us go for voting here. Look at the ECG carefully. And why you need to know this? Some say, why you need to know this? You can just put on amiodarone, everything will be cured. You are possibly correct, because amiodarone can cure most of the things except torsades. But again, you have to take the risk of proarrhythmia as well as the extra cardiac risk. So here you see couple of things. First of all, although if you look at V1 to V6, it looks like there is a concordance, but there is a small S wave in many of the leads. Sorry. So there is a small S wave here, small S wave here. So there is not full R wave in positive R wave in V1 to V6. Secondly, there is a RS R dash, and first R is smaller than the second R. Third is the axis. One is positive, AVF is positive. So you know the axis is normal. AVR is negative. So everything, and the initial slurring is not there. It is quite sharp. So sharp intrinsic deflection, relatively narrow. So this is what I meant to say. This looks like, oh, it zoomed suddenly. So this ECG is a typical of a right bundle branch. If you forget about the rate of this ECG looks like a typical RBBB. Then you know that this wide QRS is possibly a RBBB with a SVT aberrancy. So that way you differentiate between VT and SVT, and I have told you few of the characteristics which differentiates between them. So I'll wait for a few of your questions. If I don't get anything, then I'll proceed, because I have been probably a little fast. So I don't see any Jayati or Arnab. If you find any chat, you please narrate to me.
Yes, sir. Will do.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So let us go to the next ECG. So possibly 1 or 2 left. In another 10 minutes, we'll finish, and then another 15-20 minutes, we'll take up any questions if there. So this is a ECG of 12-year-old girl who had recurrent syncope while walking. So what do you think will be the most important step here? and your pose will be I'm starting here. So do you want to do a EEG for the patient? You want to reassure telling her that she has a vasovagal syncope? You want to tell that she should undergo a MRI brain? Or you want to put her on beta blocker to slow down the rate? Or you want to do a TMT because sometimes she had a syncope while walking? What do you think will be the most important one? I'm not getting any votes, so possibly you are thinking. So, is there any abnormality on the ECG? What is the abnormality? Some of you can text on the chat box what is the abnormality, and from there we can take it forward. So, let's say this ECG was absolutely normal. Then I would probably definitely do a TMT because she had syncope while walking. But here I have already the diagnosis on the ECG, which is rightly pointed out by Dr. Ashwin, which is a very long QT. In the rhythm strip, you see the T wave is almost touching the P. And then you know Amritendu has also correctly answered. So there is a long QT. So this girl has a long QT syndrome. In young age, most of the time it is a congenital one. In older age, generally it is acquired, or it is congenital one but a milder variety which gets exposed with some drugs or electrolyte imbalance. But in a younger age, when the patient is not on any drugs or doesn't have any ischemia, most of the time they have a congenital long QT syndrome. And in treatment of choice, in blanket also you can give beta blocker, but generally you tend to do a genetic analysis testing to stratify your therapy, because in some of the variants mexiletine works. TMT you can do even in long QT. What does it do? In a normal patient like you or me, during TMT the QT shortens, the QTC shortens during exercise. In long QT, it paradoxically increases. If someone has a QT of borderline QT, let's say 430 or 420, you do a TMT, then the QT will be prolonged. Let's say QTC becomes 500 or 480, then you have the diagnosis. But when you already have the diagnosis here, the QTC was somewhere 500, you do not need a TMT to prove it. So Krishna has very relevantly asked why this is not valence. Now, he has asked because this patient has some T wave inversion in V1 to V3. So, if this ECG changes would have been noted in a 60-year-old lady, I certainly would have thought of a ischemia and a long QT. But in a 12-year-old lady, girl, we do not think about ischemia, we do not think about valence, and this is called juvenile T wave pattern. When up to 7 days to 7 years, or some say 10 days to 10 years of age, 10 days of age to 10 years of age, this V1 to V3 T wave inversion is normal. So Shayantan has told about Romanov-Ward syndrome. That is one of a variant of long QT. Unfortunately, I am not very strong in theory. So possibly you can look for the genetic analysis of Romanov-Ward and the phenotypes as well. But most importantly, this patient, you need to recognize she has a evident abnormality long QT, which is often missed on ECG reporting. We tend to report normal sinus rhythm, okay, but we forget to look at the QTC. You can forget them in a patient who is asymptomatic, but a patient who is having syncope, a young girl, most importantly the syncope happening with walking or exertion, because vasovagal generally happens in a sitting position or a prolonged standing during prayer, waiting in doctor's chamber, sitting in salon. But in a patient who is walking around and suddenly dropping down, you cannot expect a vasovagal clinically. So drug history is very important, family history is important, genetic testing you can do. Beta blocker is a drug of choice. ICD is intracardiac defibrillator cardioverter is a device which is indicated in patients who has recurrences on beta blocker. Unfortunately, the patients who are candidate for ICD are very small to have a ICD, because ICD is a heavy, big device, a bigger size of pacemaker. Sympatherectomy is one of the treatment choices for those patients where you cannot put ICD. So sympatherectomy, cervical sympatherectomy is a small surgery which can be done with a mini thoracotomy. It can have an endoscopic approach also, and that has a good effect on sympathetic overdrive related ventricular tachycardia. And we'll probably finish off with one or two ECGs. What is this? Can anyone have answer on the chat box? I will not put up for voting. Just a summary of the few sessions, the 3 sessions I had. Probably this is the last session I will be having. If any one of you wish to have some session on some other topics, you please do text to Dr. Soren Paja, or I'll be providing my number and email ID in the last slide. You can text me directly also, so that we can have a session after some maybe couple of weeks or months. Meanwhile, because ECG is not the only thing you are going to learn, you have to learn many more things. So yes, Dr. Ashwin has rightly pointed out, this is atrial fibrillation. Some may say from V1 that it is a flutter, but if you look at the other ECGs, it is certainly fibrillation. In V1, the activity looks sometimes organized, and some call it atrial flutter fibrillation. I don't mind. Anyway, the treatment is same. And possibly the second last or last ECG, what is the diagnosis here? So Dr. Anshuman said it is atrial flutter. I would say I'll go back to the ECG. When you have a regular QRS, then I call it flutter. So atrial flutter with 4:1, 2:1, 3:1. Generally they have a fixed block. Either they have a 2:1, or they have a 4:1, or they have a 1:1. But once you see the irregularity, I tend to call them atrial fibrillation. Now to the next ECG. This is the ECG. What do you think? AVNRT, AVRT, or AT? Oh, Amritendu, you are surprising me, man. VT with variable AV block. Which one? This one. VT with variable AV block. I don't know. I don't find anything to call it a VT, although this is a ECG from internet. This is not my own ECG, but I am pretty sure this is not VT with variable AV block. Are you talking about the previous ECG, Amritendu? You can text in the chat box. This ECG or the previous ECG? Because sometimes there is a lag between my computer and your computer. So for this ECG, anyone goes for it? In the chat box, please. 1, 2, or 3. This we discussed last day, that when you have a narrow QRS tachycardia, we call it a SVT. So in them, we look for a couple of things. If there is a pseudo R or R prime or pseudo S, generally we call it, look at the end of the QRS, we call it AVNRT, that is a P. And if you look at significant STT changes or QRS alternance, you call it a AVRT. So these are the principal differentiating points. So Harita has rightly said it is AVNRT, and it was AVNRT indeed. About Amritendu, who has told the previous one, this is not VT. Why suddenly will think about VT in a narrow QRS ECG? So there are possibilities, there are rare exceptions where you think about a narrow QRS ECG and a VT. I'm talking about this previous ECG, but this is certainly not a VT with variable AV block. Okay. So coming back to this one, Dr. Ashwin has said it is AVRT, although it could be rarely AVRT on EP lab, but from the EP ECG perspective, this is AVNRT when the this clearly shows that there is a pseudo R prime in V1. Going to the next one. So what do you think is the treatment of choice? Probably I can skip this. Or just have some chat. You can, if you want some of you want to text that possible diagnosis. This is a 75-year-old lady admitted with syncope. She is diabetic. She suddenly had a syncope at home, became unresponsive, got to emergency, and after emergency admission, what happened? Oh yeah, the voting is already open. Yes. So you are giving calcium gluconate. Okay. So yes, indeed, insulin dextrose and calcium gluconate should be the choice. This is one of the ECG when you have very severe hyperkalemia, and you should not wait for a lab report. We should not wait for dialysis, because the patient will not be alive for a dialysis, or the patient will not be alive for a ABG even. So, or a lab report. AVG you can do quickly and get the potassium report and start correcting. Meanwhile, you start correcting. There is no harm in treating a little over treating a hyperkalemia. Angiogram is written here because sometimes you might get a call from emergency. Cardiologist will get a call that there is a ST elevation. Patient possibly had a VF at home from a STEMI and you want angiogram. But 100% you should avoid angiogram, because if you take this patient on angiogram table, you give a contrast and the patient will arrest on table 100%. So this is after treating the patient's potassium has come down below 8, and this is the ECG. And when you treat more, only the hyperacute T waves present this thing. From the ECG itself, you can have a rough guide. You can take a screenshot of this, that from the ECG, how do you know? From severe hyperkalemia, you will not see any P waves. The atrium is suppressed. There is a widening of QRS, and the QRS transits or has a transition to the T wave. So we are stopping here. This is my email ID and phone number. Possibly this is our last ECG session. I'll be happy to answer if anyone of you have any silly question. I love to answer silly questions because none of the questions are actually silly. If any one of you have any basic question related to arrhythmia, related to EP, you can ask me. You are free to contact me anytime. You can WhatsApp me also.
Sir, Dr. Vikas has asked a question. So, few times intraoperative.
I have answered that. I have answered it earlier.
I have answered it earlier. That, no? Then after that, we don't have any other questions which have.
There was one question. No, one doctor has asked that how to differentiate about SVT aberrancy and VT.
Yeah, that also you have answered.
Enumerated multiple times in multiple ECGs. We can have a revision of that again if we have some spare time. Someone asked atrial flutter with 1:1 conduction. So as I said, atrial flutter with 1:1 conduction is very rare because atrial flutter rate is around 250. Minimum rate of atrial flutter is 250. If the P wave is 250 and QRS has to be 250, the AV node has to be very, very robust, and it is only seen in pediatric age group. In adult age group, you do not find atrial flutter with 2:1. Generally, you find so 1:1 you do not find. You find 2:1. But what is important here, I'll take a whiteboard and try to explain. So when you see a ECG, let's presume the rate is around 150. Now, you forget about my QRS morphology. Just consider them a narrow QRS ECG. Okay, narrow complex ECG, and I am showing you the P waves. And the QRS rate is around 150 beats per minute. So what is your differential diagnosis on this ECG? Can anyone text on the chat box? I will come back to two of the questions Dr. Ashwin has asked. I'll come back to both of them, but let us discuss. This is very, very important. So once you have a tachycardia and your P wave falls exactly between two RR complex, what are the possible differential diagnosis? You can have a sinus tachycardia with a little longish PR. You can have, just a minute. Hello? Hello? বলো বলো হ্যাঁ আচ্ছা আমি ওগুলো নিয়ে একটু পরে কল ব্যাক করছি তোদেরকে হ্যাঁ আমি আধ ঘন্টা কল ব্যাক করছি So there are two possibilities. One is just a sinus tachycardia, P wave followed by QRS, P wave followed by QRS. There is another possibility. It is atrial tachycardia, P wave followed by QRS, P wave followed by QRS. Generally, in AVRT and AVNRT, you do not find such a discrete P waves. When you find it is a paroxysmal one, sinus tachycardia will not be a paroxysmal one. It will be a gradual onset, gradual offset. If you find a patient who has a very rapid onset of such ECG, then you always think that there is a P wave hidden within the QRS complex. So, in other words, whenever you have a atrial tachycardia or a sinus tachycardia, which is sudden onset, but the P wave is exactly between two RR complex, in that case, you always think that possibly there is another P hidden here. So it is a atrial flutter with a 2:1 AV block. In that case, you can try adenosine or you can try a carotid sinus massage. And if you show, if it is a truly atrial flutter, what you will find, P, 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 then suddenly a QRS will come, again P, 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 and a sudden QRS will come. So you expose the flutter or atrial tachycardia. So I'll stop here and let's answer one by one. So Dr. Ashwin has asked the sinus tachycardia in ICU. So again, a very relevant question, but maybe I will share my personal experience, not my literature experience. So in sinus tachycardia, if it is in the range of 90, 100, 110, and it is not hampering your hemodynamics, I will not even treat the sinus tachycardia, because most of the time they are because of pain, they are because of the patient is in failure, the patient is in cardiogenic shock. This is a compensatory mechanism. If you take it out, the patient is going to worsen. But if you feel the sinus tachycardia rate is above 125, 130, then you might think that the patient, especially has a coronary artery disease, the patient may not get a good time for the diastole, and there may not be a good perfusion of the heart. In that case, you can think about reducing the sinus rate. You can use ivabradine. You can use beta blocker as well if your hemodynamics permit. The second question you have asked, that the rate ivabradine, is there any need to control the rate? As I said, so ivabradine, beta blocker, both of you can use if the rate is more than 120 to 125, which I think up to that rate is acceptable. Patient on inotrope and sinus tachycardia, is the sinus tachycardia cause hypotension itself? Generally not, if the patient have a good LV function. If the patient has a EF of 20%, 25%, then even sinus tachycardia of more than 125, 130 can cause hypotension. You can try to cut down the rates by ivabradine, because beta blocker you don't want to use because the patient is hypotensive, is on inotropes. So possibly you can try ivabradine with a little higher dose and try to cut down the sinus rate and try to see whether the patient's hemodynamics improves. This is just trial and error. As I said, this is my personal experience I am sharing with you. No more questions. In that case, we'll go back to one of the ECG just to again make you understand the difference between SVT aberrancy and VT. So if you go to this ECG, you find, you forget about the rate. I know the rate is around, let's say 180. But if you presume the rate is 70 per minute, this ECG correlates with a ECG of a typical complete right bundle branch block. So what are the evidences of complete right bundle branch block? Typical one. One is you will have a RS RDS pattern in V1 and RS pattern in V6. There will be a prominent S in lead 1 also, and the axis will be normal, means lead 1 will be predominantly positive, lead AVF will be predominantly positive, and the intrinsic first initial part of the QRS will be very sharp. So if you do not find any one of them, in that case you need to think that it is not a typical RBBB, and in those cases you should think about a VT. Here I will definitely think about a SVT with aberrancy. What SVT? It can be AVNRT with an RBBB. It can be atrial tachycardia with RBBB. It can be sinus tachycardia with RBBB. Everything is possible. Now, if you go to this one, this is almost similar to the previous ECG. The RBBB here also looks like RS RDS pattern. The initial part is quite sharp in most of the leads. So the QRS is very sharp on the most of the leads. So it looks like from the morphology of V1 and sharpness, possibly it is a typical RBBB and it is SVT with aberrancy. But it is not. Why not? Couple of things are there. One is lead 1 is negative. Whenever lead 1 is negative, you know the axis is abnormal. So 1 negative, AVF negative puts your axis somewhere here, that is northwest axis. So you know Any northwest axis wide QRS tachycardia is VT. More importantly, if you see here, the V6 as a predominant very deep S wave, which is again in a favor of VT. You have AVR, which is positive. So the sixth rule of thumb, which you said, it fulfills almost 4 or 3 or 4. So only VA dissociation we possibly cannot see here. And secondly, possibly we do not have a very wide QRS. These two doesn't fit, and we possibly do not have a concordance in the precordial leads. Otherwise, it has an abnormal axis. The AVR is positive, V6 is negative. So these are the ways you differentiate. You remember those 5-6 points, and you remember that whether this QRS looks like a typical RBBB or LBBB or not. And obviously compare with the sinus rhythm ECG. This is one of the VT ECG, and then when you cardiovert, you see the ECG morphology is completely different. And also whenever you cardiovert, you look for pre-excitation. Here you see there the PR interval is normal, there is no pre-excitation. Then also you know this is not a pathway mediated tachycardia. So I think we are done for today. If there is, I'll go to the last slide of mine where I have my phone number and email ID. If any one of you have any query, please feel free to text me or email me or WhatsApp me, especially on ECGs. And most importantly, I would emphasize that it is very, very important and crucial to have archiving the ECGs or documents and whatever patient's data you feel is interesting. Maybe now when you are looking the patient or looking after the patient, you do not have time, but sometime you will have some free time when you can write down them as a paper. And even a case report is very, very worth to putting your footprints on the academic world. You do not always have to write up original papers. You can write case reports. Those are case report which can change the treatment plan of a patient is very, very important, even more important than a repetition of original paper. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you. I know some of the concepts which I have discussed are a little difficult for you to understand, and predominantly maybe for cardiology residents they are okay, but I have tried my best to simplify them, and what I feel that they are important for you, that's why I have tried to express them. Dr. Oyan will be taking, I think, couple of more classes. You can have some clarifications from him. He's a very good academic person and very knowledgeable one. And if there is any more class asked by Dr. Paja, I am always there for you. Thank you so much.
I would like to thank you, Dr. Bera, and thank you everyone for joining. So you can revisit all the 3 classes by Sir at edu.hcpforum.com, and all the classes, all the sessions with the elaborations will be available there. You have to just log in and then you can visit all the sessions, and not only his, every session of this MERG webinars will be available. So thank you everyone. Do share your feedback and you will receive an e-certificate on sharing your feedback. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.